Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Karen Davidov, the founder of the Jewelry Library, and we are delighted to be hosting, along with HMA2 Architects, this presentation, Rethinking Design Through Disabled Perspectives, with multisensory artist, designer, and educator Sugandha Gupta. We have a lot to get to today, so I'm going to turn the mic over to Sugandha to get things going, and enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and namaste. Sugandha Gupta here. I want to start with a self-description first. So my name is Sugandha Gupta. I'm from New Delhi, India. And currently, I am the assistant professor of fashion design and social justice at Parsons School of Design. I am a white appearing Indian woman with short platinum blonde hair, violet eyes, and I'm wearing a dark black and blue abstract print sweater with a black blazer, and I'm wearing blue sapphire earrings and a blue frame with a silver sort of line on top of the frame. Today, I'm going to present to you different experiences and perspectives of blind and visually impaired populations. I'm going to also talk about how blindness and low vision inform design and culture and art. And I'm also going to talk about how art can be a stimulating tool for design and vice versa. Please note that my presentation is a multimedia presentation, meaning that I provide my content through multiple formats, such as image descriptions, visuals, text, also live captioning. So please feel free to turn on live captioning on your Zoom bar, which appears to be black either on the bottom or the top of your screen. The other thing I would like to note is that I will make my transcript available for my deafblind and my deaf friends as needed after the presentation. And this webinar will also be recorded and will be available on YouTube very, very soon. So please stay tuned for that as well if you need to reference that. And before we start, I just want to say a few housekeeping. I just have a few housekeeping items here for you. So, number one, questions. So please know that a big part of my practice as an artist and a designer, as well as an educator, is to really ask questions. And it really informs the way I think. It really informs the way I navigate different spaces, even as a designer, even as an artist. So I highly encourage that throughout my presentation, you take note of all your questions. And Karen will graciously facilitate the Q&A at the end of my presentation, which will be lasting about 40 to 45 minutes. And so, please keep them ready, and I would love to hear your voices. This is a blank slide. This is a slide which is black, and it literally has words saying blank slide. And what I want to reinforce here is that a lot of visually impaired and blind populations encounter the world, navigate the world through other senses, especially non-visual senses. So this is a reminder for my amazing sighted and able-bodied friends and community members to please know that that you are able to interact with my presentation through your auditory senses as well, as and when you feel comfortable to engage that way. And of course, please use all your senses and use any of the modalities that I'm offering here. A lot of my content is based off of my own personal experience as a woman with a disability. Specifically, I'm legally blind due to albinism. I'll talk about that more in my slide. But please know that this presentation is based off of my perspective and the interactions that I have on a day-to-day basis with my blind and low vision friends. So this is not an all-encompassing statement. However, this is a start of a conversation, and I hope that this would motivate you to engage with the broader disabled community and learn their perspectives as well. So here's an image map of all the different places that I've lived and navigated throughout my life, starting from on the left, a street view of where my apartment is in New Delhi, India, to on the middle top and the right hand side corner of the slide are images of factories that I worked in the industrial town of Gurgaon, which is a suburb of New Delhi. On the bottom left is an image of NID, where I started my design career as a textile design student in India. In the bottom middle is an image of SCAD Fibers building, Savannah College of Art and Design, where I pursued my MFA in fibers and textiles. And currently in New York City, this is a building of the center of the Parsons School of Design, where I currently work. And the reason that it's important for me to share this with you is that I have actually found that through a lot of introspection that access has been a thread that has been common throughout my life. In some spaces like my hometown, I was thinking about access as being a facilitation or something that I received because I always had to be shepherded to places. But now, as an educator, I'm thinking of access as a way of sharing knowledge and creating a more inclusive learning environment. But I'm also thinking about um, educating students about how they can share whatever they're doing, whatever space they are in, with broader audiences to include broader audiences in their world. And the broader message that I want to convey to my audiences here is that you can all think about the spaces that you're in and use that to reflect and to think about how those spaces could be vehicles of access for other populations. So I'm going to go into a little bit of my background and some context for my community for you. So you can see an image of me with two ponytails. It's a much younger me that you see here. I'm probably 10 or 12 years old, and I'm standing with my parents, with my mother in the center, with thick black, blunt cut hair and dark eyes. And she has a big smile on her face, and she's wearing an Indian dress. And behind her on the right is my father, who is an average built man. They both have a Barley-esque complexion. My father has a little mustache, and we are all looking towards the camera. And I want to point out that my head is tilted a little bit in a strange sort of angle because I'm trying to adjust my eyes to the light. And that is a common experience that you'll find with a lot of low vision people who struggle with or are sensitive to light. And I have a little more contextual information for you here with myself as my high school self. On the right hand side corner of the slide, I'm wearing a blue sari, which is a silk sari, and I have short hair, the blonde hair. My hair was undyed at this time. I had very limited exposure to the outside world. And on the left hand side of the slide is on top left corner is myself and my professor, Emmanuel Suresh, who was an important image in my life as an educator, as a mentor, as a guide, who taught me that I could create access for myself in design, and which ultimately motivated me to become an educator, to share what I learned about design in the spaces that I was in with him. And at the bottom of this slide is an image of me with my classmates from NID. We were the batch of 2005, and we are all wearing Indian attire with broad smiles on our faces. And you can see the different skin tones, the difference in our skin tones, the stark difference. I am also having dyed hair. I have black hair, and I have almost like dark brown or blackish eyebrows. and I'm tilting my eyes lowered. My eyes are lowered again to kind of adjust myself to the light, and I have a big smile on my face because we were all graduating on this day and we were all proud of that. But I think the broader context that I want to provide for you is uh, just how much I stood out of my community, and how I am now, I'm based on my exposure. I'm thinking about my identity as an Indian woman and what it means for me to fit in the space that I'm in as an Indian woman, to be able to belong in that space as an Indian woman. And later on, as I started to research and think about what my identity is, right now I'm in New York City, but I grew up in India. So I have this kind of in between experience of being an Indian woman who doesn't quite look Indian, but has Indian values, but has the outer appearance of a white woman and has no context for that. And so I found these women with albinism also who have a really intersectional and intercultural identity. So on the left is an image of Diandra Forrest, who is an African American woman and model. On the middle is Connie Chu, who is East Asian but was raised in Sweden. And on the right is Shueli Abing, who is also East Asian, but is a Danish model and an ambassador at UNESCO. And so what I want to point out is that albinism, which is often just seen as a visual or appearance-based condition for most people, also is very intersectional, and disability at large creates this kind of conundrum for people of navigating in between spaces and kind of understanding how to find their identity and how to find their beauty in these different larger contexts. And I will come back to this idea of spaces, which is going to kind of sporadically come out throughout my presentation, but I will bring it full circle at the end of this presentation. So I want to shed a little bit more light on albinism and how people with albinism see the world. Like I said, often it's only thought of as a visual condition, but there's a lot more to it. On the left is an image of a person with albinism wearing something called bioptic glasses, which are basically prescription glasses with a telescopic lens attached to them. On the right is an image of a person with albinism using a monocular lens, which allows a greater access to small print, which is far off, which we often cannot see with our naked eyes. And often we can not see it even with the monocular, based depending on the light conditions. So generally, people with albinism are born with low vision due to a very different kind of optic nerve connection. They are considered legally blind. They have many different variables that affect their vision, including nystagmus, which is constant movement of eyes, photophobia, sensitivity to light, low peripheral vision, etc. And in this slide, I have a little bit more context for how wide the spectrum of blindness is. And, the title of this slide is Leading Causes of Blindness. But really what I wanted to show was that people can experience blindness in different stages of their life, in different points in their life. It could be something that's age related. It could be something that's caused through cancer. It could be something you're born with. It could be a total blindness, or it could be partial blindness. And also, something that I wanted to really make sure that I point out is that blindness really is a spectrum, and about 85% of blind people have some kind of perception of light, shape, and color. And there are 10 to 15% of blind populations that do not have light or color perception, or have very minimal light perception. So it's just something that we must remind ourselves, that blindness is not absence of anything, or it's not blackness. It really is a very variable experience. And here is an image of glaucoma, or what the experience of glaucoma could look like. It was created by Perkins School for the Blind. As you can see, it is a comparative study here where a person with glaucoma may see very limited amount of view. And here's another image by Perkins School for the Blind, demonstrating diabetic retinopathy, which kind of is like a spotty vision, and the areas in the black would basically be nothing. And so, when we think about blindness, I touched upon this earlier, but when we think about blindness, we often get so constricted by uh, just our idea of blindness and our assumptions about blindness. And that reflects in our culture and our language very prolifically. And so we often hear things like blind leading the blind, or blind spot, or blind faith, or blind-sided. And oftentimes these phrases, these words have very negative connotations to them. For example, when we use the word blind-sided, we often mean that it was a place where we were not aware of, or something like blind spot could even mean ignorance. And I find that there is a paradox in the idiom or the metaphor of the phrase, of the parallel phrase, blind leading the blind, because even though it tends to communicate that an ignorant person is kind of guiding another ignorant person, but I think that the paradox is that actually, in fact, blind do lead the blind in very efficient ways, and have been doing so for centuries. And an amazing example of that is the work of Louis Braille, who invented the contemporary Braille as it's read right now. And from my own personal experiences, I can share that my experience of blindness leading the blind is quite humorous, actually, because I find myself being a partially sighted guide to my blind friends who have total blindness. And oftentimes, my blind friends are telling me where to go, and I'm just being kind of their support system in sort of navigating obstacles. But I'm also using my cane, and my cane is also my support guide. Um, so I think that there's something to say there, and that is that that blindness is in fact an experience that's just different and not incomplete or not disadvantaged. So I wanted to share another negative image of blindness in the media that further keeps us from understanding blindness through broader perspectives. And so you see an image of the evil twins that was a part of the movie Matrix, and these evil twins happen to be albinos as well. Um, and on the right is an image of Arya Stark, the famous character of the blind girl from Game of Thrones. And I think what is perpetuating that negative image of blindness is also this idea that maybe they did something wrong, or their moral compass was just, kind of adulterated. And that's why, kind of as a punishment, they have this condition. And also, like in the case of the evil twins, it's kind of, again, portrayed as something evil. Difference is just perceived as evil at times. um, so, these kinds of images, as I said, just perpetuate the image of blindness as being bad, as being negative, ignorant, etc. And so now that we've seen all these different cultural meanings of blindness, I want to now take us through the idea of how blindness informs art, design, and culture in other ways that are or could be more positive. So I've been a cane user, a white cane user, for the last 6 months now. In this image, you do see a person holding a white cane, touching the textural part on the ground, on the pavement. And what I have come to realize is that as an artist, I tend to absorb a lot of information in the world in ways that I could actually personalize and also project through my art. And the experience of using a white cane has shown me that I am much more connected with the earth in a way that I had never imagined that I could be. For example, and I have made a video on this, which I will share at the end of my presentation with you. But the cane has helped me to navigate the earth, the textures of the earth, what they sound like, what the pavement feels like. Sometimes the pavement that I'm navigating is so smooth that it kind of creates a buzz or a vibration in the cane, which is very stimulating for me and also gives me ideas and inspires me to create different kinds of textures that might generate different stimulation. So yes, it is a navigational tool that helps me bump less and bruise myself less, but it also creates these stimulating experiences that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Blindness also brings an awareness of engagement with the world in non-visual ways, in more humane ways, with a very wholesome approach. And so in this image, you can see my friend Cynthia Bennett. You can only see her side profile, and her hands are touching one of my recent pieces in the jewelry library, which has some copper pieces in it, and it's a necklace. And the rest of the necklace is made of handmade felt. Um, and something that really stands out for me when my blind friends or my low vision friends experience my art is that they are able to actually gauge the materials that I've used. Even though they do not have a background in textiles, they're able to gauge my materials just because they have engaged with those materials somewhere else in my work. Um, so blindness also helps us in understand different technologies. In this image, you are seeing Daniel Kish, who was not born blind, but he lost his vision at a very young age due to blind tumor, and he is demonstrating how he echolocates. And he teaches how to echolocate to not just blind populations, but also to sighted populations and anyone who might benefit from this modality of navigating the world. And again, it's a really poignant example of how the blind lead the blind. Another fascinating person that I've come across is Krishna Washburn. On the right-hand side, she is actually, in fact, in the image, she's standing in a very dynamic pose, wearing a beautiful white dress and a fabric headgear, which is also white, which is kind of twined with her braid. She is what she calls a darkroom ballet teacher, and she teaches ballet dance in auditory formats to visual and blind and visually impaired students through Zoom. On the left is an image of her film called Telephone Film, which is a completely audio described movie of performances, all made by different kinds of bodies, which are able-bodied and non-disabled bodied as well. And blindness also helps us as artists to generate art that is tactile and that is multisensory. For me, this really has lent itself in a major way. As soon as I realized that through my reflection that my senses of touch and sound are more prolific than my sight, I wanted to explore that and see what that would do for me to generate art, but also include broader audiences to engage with my art. And this was actually a collaborative piece. It's called Texture Map. And what you see is pieces like circular bubble-like structures, all made with felt that was made up of alpaca, silk, and BFL wool, blue-faced Leicester wool. And each of these bubbles has different textures in them, including lavender and cedar wood that have a very strong smell or scent to them. But they also have empty spaces. Some of them do not have anything. But visually, if you just looked at it visually, you wouldn't really know that by looking at it visually. And so it kind of deceives the sight, and it gave me the opportunity to collaborate with Cynthia Bennett, who commissioned me for this piece, and really understand my art more and engage with my senses in a deeper, more meaningful way. And in this slide actually is Professor Georgina Cleach, who's also my friend, who I also really admire. She is the author of several books, including More Than Meets the Eye, What Blindness Brings to Art. She has been an English professor for several years, and now she's back in New York City. But what I really enjoy about her her lecture or her advocacy around image description is that she talks about how image descriptions can be a tool to emphasize a painting. She is a daughter of artists, so she grew up with art. And another thing that I would like to point out in her practice is that she also asks really meaningful questions that maybe as a sighted person you may not even pay attention to. So again, the idea that image descriptions are just providing access to blind people who are often considered empty vessels, as she points out, is absolutely false, because we all bring our own knowledge and we all ask questions based on our experiences, which can engage everyone and which can create new content and new understanding of the piece that otherwise we would not have. Another deaf-blind contemporary here is Haben Girma. She's the first deaf-blind woman to graduate from Harvard Law School. I've talked about her extensively in my other work, but on the bottom left of the slide is an image of a braille display that she's holding up and demonstrating how she communicates with the world. So when a person uses a keyboard connected with this braille display and types something on it, the braille pops up and facilitates her to communicate with the person, which is something that she innovated along with technology companies. And and she is dancing, she's doing salsa dance with someone on the image on the right. And I wanted to point out that blind and visually impaired folks are not just thinking about access, they are thinking about entertainment, they are engaging with the world physically. Even though she's deaf blind, she engages with dance through tactility. So our bodies are incredibly adaptive and creative, and we always find interesting ways of engaging with the world. This is another interesting contemporary that I found. This is Christine Ha, who is a chef. She won the 3rd season of MasterChef. And what I like about her craft, or her engagement with her craft, is that she actually tastes all the ingredients before she starts to cook with her choice of ingredients. And so this way she's able to curate a palette that's unique to her, and that's her engagement with the ingredients. This is Chris Downey, who lost his sight when he was in his 40s because of brain tumor as well. And he talks about in his TED talk how his white cane is like a prosthetic finger for him, which helps him touch the earth. But he also talks about how after losing his sight, he's able to engage with tactile maps or tactile blueprints in a way that he can actually visualize through his own experience what he would feel like in those spaces, how people would interact in a space, what would the space sound like. And now that experience of blindness and engaging with the world in non-visual ways is informing his practice as an architect. And this leads me to our next segment for this presentation, which is just talking about how access can be a stimulating tool for design and vice versa. And oftentimes when we think about access, when we think about design, we are often just thinking about words like accessible design, or movements like accessible design, or adaptive fashion, or inclusive design. And when I started engaging with design, I really did not have any choice but to design my own tools. And it is only years later, after I practiced and I worked in the industry, that I started thinking about designing for inclusion and just creating work from design to include other people. So um, access has been a common thread in my life in this way, and design can often be only seen through the lens of these other movements, or that are kind of siloed into a corner. But uh, when we think about design and the basic principles like emphasis, balance, contrast, rhythm, and engage with them in non-visual ways, we can really start to explore the idea of designing for design's sake. So this is again another really great example of how design for design's sake can facilitate access for greater communities. So Frank Lloyd Wright designed this museum, the Guggenheim Museum, and his original intent for this design was to create a top-down experience for the audiences who view this museum. And so people would ideally, according to his plan, take the elevator up to the top floor and navigate down from there. But now it's open to be navigated in any shape or form. But it also creates this greater inclusion for users who maybe like to skate or maybe use wheelchairs and other forms of navigating the world. And disability also encourages us to think creatively, think critically, and find creative approaches. Because disabled people have always had to create access for themselves, it has allowed us to think of ways of doing things that maybe a normative body would not think of. And in this image, you can see uh, some people using their mouths to draw, which is not what I'm literally recommending anybody to do, but just to question how you can make marks in different ways, how you can engage with design processes in different ways that are more than just visual ways of engaging with design. This actually is really interesting. I found this work very recently in the Talking Textiles conference. This is an image of a sweater that was eaten up by moths that is mended by Celia Pim, who loves mending, and that is kind of her spiel as an artist. She's a London-based artist. Um, but I wanted to point out that it kind of really resonates. It's an idea that really resonates within the disability community really naturally, because it's talking about mending, it's talking about care, and it's talking about interdependence. And in some shape or form, we are all interdependent, and we are all taking care of each other within the disability community. And this sweater with the mended parts that are mended with the purple color are really speaking to me in that narrative, and highlighting that we really can use imperfections as a way of highlighting something and even designing something. And this is the work of the famous fashion designer Rekawa Kubo. This is part of her body of work called Lumps and Bumps that originated in the late 90s. And what I love about this work is that it's seen as radical. She often talks about, she's a Japanese artist, designer, who often talks about just the dichotomies within high and low, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, what's fashion and what's not fashion, what's art and what's not art. And in this work, you can see sort of the hands are kind of restricted by this kind of cocoon shape that is surrounding the whole body with this really fitted skirt, and it's all like a big red silhouette, but it also creates a new shape of the body itself. And here's another example of her work where she uses pads and cushions to create very amorphic body shapes or body silhouettes, and kind of is questioning this idea of beauty and normative body, and what does it mean to create shapes through bodies that are just not seen in fashion. So she's really thinking about liberating and non-conforming to the norms in the society. Um, and yes, design really does matter. In the slide, you see two images. On the right is an image of APS, which is an acronym for Accessible Pedestrians Signal, which you can find all over the city. It's a button that you press, and that button vibrates and makes sounds when the signal for walking is on or the pedestrian light is on. On the left is an image of a four-way crosswalk. There are a lot of crosswalks in New York City that are controlled, meaning the traffic in all directions is halted for the time that the pedestrian light is on in order to create a safer pedestrian experience. And so, these are not just random facts or random systems. These systems have been thought out by research, by looking at pedestrian safety. And so, yes, design can really change the way that we interact with each other, that we look at each other, that we consume our spaces, and that we you surround in our spaces. So I just wanted to give another example of an interior space. And in this particular space, it's like a large interior of what might be a house. And you see a staircase which has those grooves, the staircase which has those planks and grooves under it. And there are several other items that you see on the floor in the foreground, like a roundish, ovalish kind of table, wooden table, a lush kind of feeling sofa on the left, and there's also a kind of a bench or seating on the right of that sofa, um, and it seemingly has a top light or space light, what they call in the architecture and interior spaces. But what I wanted to point out is that a person with low vision, I can already point out several things that might be obstructions for me in this space. For example, what if the staircase was a ramp, a beautiful ramp that also became an art piece in the space? And could the space light be controlled in a way that wouldn't strain a person's eyes who's sensitive to light? Could Do we really need so many objects in a space? And I'm not criticizing the space, but I'm just offering another way of thinking about access through design and intentional design that can really broaden the scope of the use of that space. Here's another example of texture that could be used in different spaces. Could texture be a way that we navigate spaces? Could texture also be decorative, but also be tactile? And what happens when we are in spaces that we want to engage in deeply as artists? These are images of myself with my monocular in a museum space. I'm probably about 3 feet or less from a wall that has a very brightly lit excerpt from the exhibit. And I am using my monocular to read this excerpt because I cannot read it. And below is an image of me, again, using my monocular to look at an image that the form was just not clear to me, and I'm using this technology to see the form. Sometimes, if we are lucky, we are able to engage with spaces by the means of touch. But oftentimes, these experiences are curated weeks in advance. Oftentimes, these experiences are curated with obstacles like plastic gloves in that space. And so again, we have an opportunity to use access to create experiences that are inclusive and conducive for broader audiences. So now I'm kind of going into best practices and what can be done to engage broader audiences. What are some of the simple things that can be done? And I would like to say that we can start by just thinking of the question, who can engage with your design? Is it just a particular demographic, or could that actually, in fact, be broadened by some simple things that can be incorporated? For example, including large fonts, including bold fonts, using sans serif fonts, which are non-decorative and more legible, like Calibri and Helvetica. High contrast and darker backgrounds. Hopefully you've noticed by now that I've used dark backgrounds throughout my slide, which creates greater access to information that's visual. When you have events in a large space, uh, think about ambient noise and how a person with less vision or less hearing would be able to engage in that space. Is there a space where you can provide relief for overstimulation using some tactile objects, maybe a tactile weighted blanket? Could you use live captions in your day-to-day softwares? Technology these days offers live caption in Mac, in Windows, in PowerPoint. Sign language interpretation is always a really good option to have, again, to increase audiences' inclusion and participation. Image descriptions are often seen as a obligatory add-on, but like I said before, they can be very stimulating tools. Along with audio descriptions, now we can have audio descriptions be offered in Netflix and other streaming services, which are often also used by sighted audiences because they just provide more context and more information. And always think about multiple ways that your participants can engage with your work, including tactile materials, swatches, whatever it is that you can share. And last but not the least, we urge that helping others is a great virtue. Wanting to guide others is a great virtue. But there is a space for asking if the person needs that help and that touch, because that unsolicited touch can often also be very dangerous and strip the person of their agency. So I recommend that you please ask if the person wants to be touched before touching them or grabbing them. And absolutely do not yell at people, which is a common experience that I and other blind people have, because it's assumed that we don't know what we are doing or how we are navigating. And this is just something that I think across the board is felt throughout the disabled community. We encourage you to please get to know us if you want to co-create with us, if you want to co-design with us, understand us, engage in different ways. There are so many events, art shows, performances by disabled people. This will just broaden your horizon about disability, and you can then start to engage in a very organic and non-transactional manner with the disability community. And I just want to emphasize that this was an image with me standing in the center with my friend Cynthia Bennett on my right and Wale on my left. And we're all part of our blindness community. And in these spaces, I have found that I find most comfort because blind people actually do not use visual ways of getting to know a person. Blind people actually really get to know you by what you present to them, in terms of your content, in terms of your mind, in terms of your spirit, as opposed to just what you're wearing and what you're possessing. Um, and, we're kind of getting very close to the end of my presentation. And I said, I promised that I'm going to add the full circle moment of spaces. So now I'm in New York City. I'm a cane user. In this image, I'm wearing a dark purple dress with a blue, orange, and red color blocked cane. And I'm wearing sunglasses, and I'm standing tall on a stone in the center of Midtown Manhattan. And what I want to say is that I have found that through the navigation of all these different spaces, I do not conform to any of these traditional stereotypes of what disability should look like and feel like and sound like. I really am getting more and more comfortable in my skin. But I also want to offer that I have found an epiphany in my in-betweenness. I often felt a victim of being an in-betweener, where like I couldn't really belong in the blind space because I'm not quite blind enough. I couldn't really belong in the sighted space because I'm not quite sighted enough. I'm not white, but I'm perceived white. I'm brown, but I'm not perceived brown. But now I found that there is something that my in-betweenness offers in a way that's really profound and prolific to me and others. And that is that I can offer something to the blind community that the sighted world cannot offer to them. But as a person with low vision, I can understand, and I can offer something to the sighted people who do not know the experience of being unsighted and what it feels like, and kind of be that bridge in the middle. And in that way, I find that I'm not just an in-betweener, but I'm really the in-betweener. And I encourage anybody who finds themselves torn between spaces to embrace their in-betweenness and find purpose through their in-betweenness. And with that, I would like to conclude my presentation and open up the floor for questions. I'm really looking forward to hearing your voices. And before I unshare my screen, I would like to say that on the screen, you can see my contact details. You can contact me at guptas1@newschool.edu, or even follow me on Instagram at sensory_textiles. I also am going to share a few resources, including my video on my cane usage or my cane journey, that I would love for you to watch or engage with if you can. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Hi, hello. That was terrific. Thank you, Sugandha.
Thank
I
you.
sort of feel like one of the things I learned is to describe myself. I am a white woman wearing with light dark brown hair, and thick black glasses. I'm wearing a multicolored floral turtleneck and a necklace and a beige jacket. So thank you. I think I've become aware of so many things to think about, as we sort of go on with the day. And there are some questions. So I want to ask, let me see if Miranda would like to ask the question herself.
Great.
And I'm going to see how I can do that. One second.
Just one thing before you ask your question. Please say your name and a short, very brief description of what you look like. Thank you so much.
Hey, Miranda.
Hi, is it working?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So my name's Miranda. I am a white-skinned person with long brown curly hair going down past my shoulders, and I'm wearing glasses. So a question I've been wondering, especially because where I work, there's a plan to eventually redesign the space in 5 years' time to like make it more accessible. I'm not involved in the design of that per se, although I've been trying to develop accessible resources primarily for neurodivergent visitors. A question I do want to ask is if there are any resources for, or your thoughts on how do you strike that balance between designing for designing sake while also keeping accessibility in mind, just because it seems like there's as someone who's done this work, there's so much to have to keep in mind when you're finding ways to make things accessible. And I think you make a good point that you sometimes then you kind of forget the fun of of designing, but like how do you keep that fun, or who are artists or designers or just anyone who works in the arts cultural spaces that you would recommend people search into to learn more about ways that they balance design with accessibility components?
Yeah, thank you so much, Miranda, for that question. I'm so happy to see you here. Um, I think there are several ways to work with design and also think about access. So, number one, I think because you have such a specific criteria for creating access in a space, specifically for people who are neurodivergent, I would definitely reach out to a few community members and also see if you can facilitate an honorarium or some kind of a thank you or appreciative token, because oftentimes our expertise is wanted but we never get paid for that. And I really do advocate for people with disabilities to get paid for their labor and their expertise. But I think also, just thinking about different aspects of the space, and just how that space is going to be used. I know that there are so many things that like can be very overstimulating for neurodivergent people. So just like having a space where or a corner where one could just get some relief from that overstimulation can really improve the way one is feeling, and then can further get back and engage with the event in more meaningful and exciting ways that are not overwhelming. Um, yeah, I mean, and I think I do have a few contacts that I can connect you with and share. I have shared a few resources, but I think it's really just thinking about there's so many lists of best practices out there that I think, I don't know if I could add anything new to that, but I think overall just the most important thing is that if there is a specific demographic in mind, then really getting to know them and knowing if that space is already in some ways accessible. So what's already in that space that can be elevated or just be as it is, and then what are some of the gaps or gray areas that could be addressed. So I hope that's somewhat helpful. I will be happy to connect more and chat more about this specific space and event.
Yeah, that's very much appreciated. This is Miranda, just to reintroduce. But yeah, very much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miranda. I think, Karen, you are muted. I can see your lips moving.
Okay. I have another question. Shilpa, I'm going to unmute you. Can you, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Hi, Sugandha. That was a very informative and insightful talk. So this is Shilpa Das. I'm an Indian. I wear glasses. I have black hair. I'm about 50. And yeah, so your presentation was very insightful, Sugandha. My question to you is, because you've been working in the area of textiles for so long, could you share a little bit? Because for some time in the middle, my network connectivity was not so great, and I could barely hear what you were saying. So, could you or would you know of sensory textiles being an accessibility aid to people with blindness? And to what extent has work been done here? If, in case you might know,
Yeah.
I'll be happy to listen.
Yeah, thank you, Shilpa. It's so lovely to see you and hear your voice after years. I am so excited to hear you, and so happy that you could be part of my presentation. Thank you so much for coming. I did start the process of creating sensory textiles through through my own body of work, and it started as a grad student at SCAD. It really started, I think it really started at NID because I was already exploring ways of creating access for myself to learn processes of textiles, like how do I weave with low vision, how do I weave with 210 yarn that I can barely see but it's considered chunky in India, and how do I learn to stitch with a sewing machine when I can't really see the eye of the needle of the machine. I didn't really have very good visual aids, low visual aids in India. I didn't have access to anything. So when I was a grad student, I really had the clear vision that I wanted to use my strengths to create a body of work that I didn't know what would look like or feel like or sound like. And as I started working on that body of work, I found a lot of relief and a lot of excitement in the broader communities. I shared my work with, always shared my work with the blind communities that I could find locally in Savannah as well. And I found that, my approach to design, which was accessible for me, was also exciting for other blind people and other people with disabilities, like people who are deaf, are more visual. So I wanted to make sure that my work was, in fact, also visual while also being highly tactile, highly auditory. And slowly I started including other senses like scent in my work, and sound elements in my work as well, inside my work as well. And over the years that I have engaged with such diverse people from the broader disabled community, I have got really positive feedback. I found that even if you're not per se designing pieces that are multisensory, or even if you're not thinking about disability as such, even if you're able to offer your work in multisensory ways, it really creates access to for the broader community to get to know your work, to experience it in ways that they just don't have the option to most of the time, because people are just so engaged in design through their visual senses. It is the dominant way that we engage with design from the get-go. From the time that you're in foundation, you're only thinking about how to understand design visually in many different ways, including the basic principles of design. So I think that there is a lot there that is unexplored, that is untapped, and really it's design. It's not, it's not any particular kind of design. It's really design that is giving us that in. My professor Suresh, the first time he saw me struggling with a steel ruler, I would end up like cutting my fingers all the time, because the steel ruler was so reflective, always reflecting light back to me, and I could never hold it vertically to cut, which is the traditional way, not correct, the traditional way to cut. And he said, hey, like, if you can't see the steel ruler, why don't you make it with cardboard? And it was a simple and daunting idea for me, but I really understood that I need to make my own tools I need to really own my process in order to gain access to design. And so it is design, in fact, indeed, that facilitated access for me. And so I'm sorry that my answer is not direct, but yes, multisensory modes of engagement really do lend their way to creating access to engaging broader populations, but not just in literal ways, but also just offering your work in those modalities can make a huge difference, because people are just excluded from everything. How does a blind person know what a princess seam line is unless they get to touch a princess seam line, unless someone describes it to them, unless they get to touch it maybe in a tactile format? So there is so much information that is lost because the population is just not considered. And you know coming back slightly to Miranda's question too, when the museum started curating spaces, it it's a process. They have so many steps when they're creating an exhibition, when they're curating an exhibition, that include designing the posters, designing the content, writing excerpts. If disabled people were considered in the beginning of that process, this would not be a conversation today. But because that has never been the case, disabled people are just not used or thought of in that process. It is a special conversation. It's a special need, even though it really is the potential in design to include that from the get-go, and we wouldn't have to have this conversation at all.
Sure.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question
No,
somewhat.
that answers my question very well. Thank you, Sugandha. And
Thank you.
the incident with the ruler
Yeah.
was particularly illuminating. We can have another conversation about it later. Thank you
Yes.
so much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thank you.
Well, we're almost, we have time for one more question. And I'm gonna unmute you, Krishna, to ask.
Hi, Sugandha, it's Krishna.
Hi, Krishna.
This is Krishna Washburn. I'm
So
the
happy to
darkroom
see you,
ballet
Krishna.
teacher. It's me.
Yes, yes.
I really, really loved the wide variety of examples of access, especially those coming from within the disability community that you included in your presentation. And what I also loved is your mention that not all design choices we can make to make our world more accessible are necessarily expensive or
Expensive.
high tech, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to know, like, just give me an example of like one of your personal favorite low cost, low tech
Mm,
access choices that you
mm,
have made or other designers have made that can
mm,
increase the accessibility of our world.
Wow, that's a really amazing question. Thank you, Krishna, for that really thoughtful remark and thoughtful question. I mean, I think I do the low tech with my work. Most of my work is based off of very analog processes. I like to call it analog as opposed to low tech because I feel that all craft is high tech because all tech comes from craft and from our hand processes. I do really feel strongly about that. And, I think that one example of how I choose to use access as a tool, both as a generative tool and as a way of including broader audience, is just offering multiple ways that people could engage with my work. So, for example, last year I had an exhibition in California at the San Diego State University Museum, and the work was not available for touch. However, I sent swatches of my work to the curators and emphasized that they be touched by audiences. So, the traditional model of a museum experience does not include tactile experience for whatever reasons, and I don't want to go in that because that's a whole separate talk. But even the gesture of providing a small swatch of material that maybe feels like your piece, maybe looks like your piece, maybe informs the materiality of that piece, can make a huge difference in the engagement of that audience. Also, these high tech technologies, I'm coming back to the word high tech just for a brief second. Like the QR codes are used in the museum, and I'm very critical of QR codes because oftentimes QR codes are not a direct portal into audio. You have to use the QR code first. You have to find it. It's almost always merged somewhere on the wall, and once you find it successfully, then you have to click on it. So again, you're interacting with your site. And then if you click it and you're in that portal, there is a lot of text that you have to read to be able to get to the sound part of it, which is often not available for all pieces either. So it's a deception. They're deceiving people who are thinking that, oh, if I just click that thing, I'll get sound. But no, that's not the case. And you kind of have to, it's a trial and error process. It's a whole different process. Is it better than descriptions on the wall? Absolutely, because I can zoom in, I can magnify. It's much better than having to use my monocular, which I have to squint to look through. It's extremely exhausting and tiresome to read a big body of text using a monocular lens. Even looking at a street sign on a bright day using a monocular lens is painful because I'm extremely light sensitive and I cannot keep my eyes open. So, a simple way that a person could facilitate in that scenario, a low tech, simple, inexpensive way, is most museum openings have docents in them and curators in them. Could that be an opportunity to offer a guided tour? As opposed to having a special tour for only low vision people who are coming in separately, not with the mainstream society, separately to view the space that really is public. Um, so, and I do that whenever possible. If I have a show, I had a show at the Jewelry Library this fall. I was there for two events, one where I specially offered a talk for everybody, and the other where I was physically in the space during the opening night. I offered verbal tours wherever or whoever wanted them. and everybody was welcome in that space. It was an elevator building. These are just simple ways in which, without any additional effort. I also had a uh, braille conversion of my statement so that blind people can just touch the braille and have access to my artist statement, instead of, oh, let me make it accessible for you and save you from your blindness. So yeah, I think there are so many different ways that people can engage, with analog ways of creating access. So thank you so much for that wonderful question, Krishna. I would be happy to stay on for one more question if someone really wants to, engage and have another question.
Hi, I don't have any more questions. If anyone has one, please join in. I think that there's so much, Sugandha, that we touched on today that could be another talk. So I hope we do have that chance
Yeah.
to welcome you back and have another conversation. If there's any other anything else that
Final questions.
Contribute, any final questions? I'm just checking here. We're after 1 o'clock, so I will share. One of the questions is, we will share this recording, and I think you all have found in the chat Sugandha's some of her resources and the short film. And we're happy to field any further questions, and you have Sugandha's contact info. This was such an important talk, Sugandha, and so thoughtful and insightful and wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much everybody for listening and coming to my talk and engaging with it. Thank you. I really appreciate it.